In at number 10, we have got the Pteranodon, and this is just one of those creatures where you can really just get around on Ragnarok if you have a creature like this. It just allows you to travel across the map quickly, efficiently, and really as you should in terms of everything. This creature will just get you everywhere, and with that spin attack as well, it is a pretty useful PvP creature, as it is definitely one for doing those early game raids. This thing's saddle is also unlocked at level 38, which is a nice low level, so you don't need to be particularly high in terms of your level to actually get the ability to have air travel, which is definitely something, although yes, levels aren't too much of an issue anymore, as when in like original Ark terms, you would have to spend ages getting up to level for the Pteranodon saddle, but nowadays it's not really that bad whatsoever. Unless you're playing official, then it matters more, but still Ark has just generally progressed, and it is easier to get up to those levels now, especially with note runs. You can very easily get to it and beyond, and even to creatures like the RG and all of that. That creature is later on the list, by the way, so watch out for that. The only real difficulties you're going to find with this creature is, if it's your first time, you might find some difficulty getting that chitin and keratin for the saddle. Personally, I'd recommend going for chitin and just kill all the Titanomira that you can find, and maybe the Pulmonoscorpiuses if you know you are able to quite easily kill those at the stage of doing this. But probably go for the Titanomira and the Meganeura, actually, which I haven't mentioned before. They're going to be your best sources of chitin, and obviously these things can be very tamed very simply with something like a bowler, so it's really not going to be very difficult for you. Next up, we've got the Baryonyx, and this is the peak caving creature out there. This thing is just so good at traversing caves, and it is also a pretty neat underwater creature as well, and just a generally quite nice, cool, useful carnivore, which really does help this creature in terms of just general use, in terms of everything that you may use this thing for across all of Ragnarok. And obviously it's great pretty much across any map that has caves, and considering it's not a flyer, it is accessible on every map, because you know they're not kind of handicapped, as you could say, like flyers are on Gen 1 and Gen 2. A little bit of an unnecessary point because we're talking about Ragnarok, but still it is something to consider if you like to play on those maps a lot. Whereas with this creature, obviously you don't really have to do any of that. They also have some pretty decent mobility as well, which can't be said for some other carnivores, which really do lack in this space. And you know, it's really a nice thing for a carnivore to have. It's sort of a privilege, really, as if you had creatures like the Rex, they're really not mobile, and same with creatures like the Giga, totally not mobile whatsoever. But also, if you press right click on your mouse, they also do have a nice stun attack as well under the water, which can stun creatures up to the size of a Megalodon, which is a pretty nice little neat bonus. And you know, it can actually maybe keep you alive in some underwater scenarios where maybe you wouldn't be able to get out and escape otherwise. Next up, we have got the Thyla, and this creature is mainly just here because it is such a useful travel mount, and considering the redwoods isn't actually too bad on Ragnarok, and it's not in a kind of too bad of a place either. You can spawn in the highlands and very easily get to it quite quickly, and it also, again, it just seems to be a little less hostile than the one that you can find on the island. Definitely a lot steeper in terms of gradient, as getting up through all that redwoods can take a little bit of handiwork because it is kind of on a mountain, at least the main one that I'm thinking about, but it does flatten out after a certain amount of time. It's just, you know, that first section you go along the beach, it is quite a bit of a steep hill to actually get up into it. Not really much of an issue, especially when you're going to be taming one of these creatures. You'll be a decent level where you'll probably have a Pteranodon and some other creatures like that to easily traverse through, but you can obviously get one of these things before you get something like a Pteranodon, and you can actually get them pretty early on. The net gun is going to help you a lot, but obviously you might not have the net gun, and you can very simply and easily build a trap, just a 2x1, and make it out of wood, or you can make it out of stone, just whatever preference. But you know, you don't really need anything more than wood for these things, and then you can just trank it out, and you don't need a saddle for it. Just lead it back to your base, and then when you get that saddle, then you can take it out for a spin, and you can still take it out for a spin and level it even before it does have a saddle, because you can just take it out with you, following behind you, and it will assist in any kind of combat scenarios. It essentially just turns you into an even more powerful beast, and also those creatures will aggro off of you and then aggro onto the Thyla instead, which, you know, if the Thyla is about to die, you could kind of also use it as a little bit of bait as well, although that's probably not the preferable option, and that's only for very desperate situations. The Thyla also deals the bleed ability, which really does assist it when it comes to combat, as it deals damage on a percentile based scale instead of just raw damage. So no matter the creature you're facing, it will always deal a certain percentage of damage with that bleed ability, which is really cool. In at number 7, we have got the Giganotosaurus, and this creature is just such a big, hefty creature, and considering how abundant it is in the Highlands biome, I kind of do have to include it on this list, although it is kind of slightly outdated. Whereas some newer creatures, actually the next creature on the list is a preferable creature in my opinion, probably obviously why it is higher up on the list, but still, this really does pack a punch, and especially considering how much they spawn in Ragnarok, I have to include it here. The Tiny Tim has to continue its reign, although it kind of could deal with a little bit of a TLC. Not saying a lot, I'm just a little bit, which could kind of get it back into the modern days of Ark, because like I've said so many times on this channel, Ark is really an evolving game, no pun intended, and you know, from that, creatures will just become outdated, and this is a little bit, but I'm not going to diss the Giga anymore. I'm going to talk about why it is so great. This thing deals hefty amounts of damage, has a very decent health stat, and although its mobility isn't the best, you really don't need it for a creature like this, and although they can't go into bosses on the map, they will absolutely decimate every other creature on the map with absolute ease, and you'll have no issues with it whatsoever. Just be aware of that rage meter, as you don't want that to fill up and then have this thing aggro on you and just kill you, because these things definitely will. They are just so powerful, big, huge beasts. And next up, we have got the Carcharodontosaurus, and this creature is the one that I was talking about. It is essentially the Giga, but now of the modern age, so maybe the Giga doesn't need a TLC because this creature exists, which, you know, kind of does get around the solution, but still, I really don't want to leave the Giga behind. But essentially what this thing has is it does not have that rage meter anymore, and obviously from that it means it has a much more kind of reliable health stat, and also it deals the bleed ability, which the Giga doesn't. It does when it's wild, it does not when it's tamed, and also once that blood rage is full up to the max, it deals more damage than the Giga as well. And the mobility and stamina is significantly better because that stamina drain is a lot lower, and they're also a lot faster creatures, so it makes sense why they are just the superior option to choose. The only real downside being the taming method is a little bit more lengthy, but it doesn't really require as many resources because you're not pelting tons and tons of tranks into this thing, although that's not really too much of an issue, especially just considering the level when you're going to be taming this thing. You're going to be at least in the mid 90s, maybe early 90s at the earliest, possibly even 80s if you're that kind of person. You like to tame the creatures way before you get the saddle, because I'm pretty sure it's unlocked at level 96 if I'm correct. And although while you're taming it you can ride it around in that second phase, you cannot do that once it's tamed. Doesn't really make too much sense why you can ride it during the taming and then you get kicked off, but I guess that's just the way it is, and it kind of does make sense because then this would be even more OP. In at number 5, we have got the Megatherium, and this is just such a great creature again for gathering chitin on the map. And if I'm not incorrect, I think the boss on Ragnarok does include the Broodmother. I'm just gonna quickly research it up as I'm talking along here, but either way, the Megatherium has a particularly harsh ability against, you know, insects in terms of all of that, and obviously that insect buff is really going to make this creature just so powerful for, you know, just its general use of killing insects. But it also is a pretty good herbivore as well, and that does definitely benefit it, especially just for a generally versatile Ark creature, because, you know, that does just make a better Ark creature. And actually I was wrong there, the bosses are the Manticore and the Dragon, but I still think my point stands for this creature being on here, although considering those are the bosses, I might actually say to put the Theri on this list as well. I'm not going to, but I'm just going to give it a mention here because that is a really great creature against the Dragon. But the Manticore really is nothing to be worried about. So that creature is just really, really easy to tame. Kind of makes sense, you know, take the Dragon, take the Manticore, makes sense. I think it's maybe like, it's not Crystal Isles, but it's one of the other kind of DLC maps that has the Megapithecus and the Broodmother, I think, as the bosses. But either way, this thing has that insanely great insect buff, which is going to be an insane chitin gatherer, and considering how much chitin you need in the general Ark game and also just how cool this creature is, I think it's quite useful. Next up, we have got the Mantis, and this creature is just so jam-packed full of its one great ability that it really does need to be warranted on this list, especially considering how easy these things are to tame on this map, as you only need woolly rhino horns. You're probably not going to get deathworm horns, but you can if you want. I'm pretty sure the Ragnarok map has a desert biome. I'm confident of it, but you can get woolly rhino horns. Regardless, I find them to be a little bit easier. Again, pretty confident that the Ragnarok map has the desert biome in it. Put a comment down below if it does, because I hope I'm not making anything up there. If I am, woolly rhino horns are the way to go. Obviously, I tend to usually get those anyway on this map. If I was on Scorched, I would get deathworm horns, because woolly rhinos, as far as I'm concerned, don't really spawn on that map, and it makes more sense. The main ability, if you couldn't tell already, that these creatures have is they can wield any kind of melee weapons and then just slash creatures to bits with them, and it really does just, it benefits these things as well greatly. It just makes them really great harvesters. They can gather loads of fiber with sickles, which is actually quite rare for creatures to be really good at gathering fiber. Again, they can actually decimate creatures with swords and pikes, and harvest loads of metal with picks, loads of stone with hatchets. Just like the utilities for these things are essentially just limited to all of the different types of harvesting in the game. Pretty sure you can't gather berries with this thing. Don't know how you would. Maybe there's a mod for it out there somewhere. But either way, some really, really great creatures. In at number 3, we have got the RG, and this creature is here because it's just such a great resource gatherer of so many things across all of Ark. So it really does make sense to just be that ideal Ark creature that kind of does it all for you when it comes to metal gathering. And I guess I kind of want to put the Anki in this spot as well, because they really do go together as a really great tag team pair, as you can use that thing to gather loads of metal, and then you can use this thing to carry it around everywhere. These things again can also pick up quite a healthy amount of creatures. You could probably figure that, considering that they could pick up Ankis, and an Anki is quite a sizable creature for a flyer of this size to pick up. And also it can pick another creature up in its beak as well, although that's probably not the most useful ability, at least in my terms of use, because, you know, I don't really need to be carrying a dodo around when I'm carrying an Anki. It's just maybe not something that I really need to do, but, you know, at least the feature's there. They also do have a smithy as their saddle, which is great because, you know, you're going to be doing a lot of metal farming this thing. You might be using a pick if you do not have access to an Anki, or if you just haven't tamed an Anki yet, or if you're just not going to tame an Anki. Then if that metal pick breaks, you can easily repair it in this thing, as long as you do have metal ingots in its inventory. Don't use raw metal. I have to say this because there's always someone that has done that before, and I'm sorry to hear that. Sorry. And also these things do have a regen buff as well when they kill a dead body, which is just, that's really nice to have. It's just, it benefits these creatures more than you actually might think on the surface. In at number 2, we have got the Griffin, and this creature really just does have to be on this list, doesn't it? It is just such a powerhouse of Ragnarok. It travels so speedily. I do have some extra speed. It doesn't actually travel at this speed in just vanilla terms. I have really cranked it up just because it kind of looks cool. Sorry about any of the stutterings you'll find in this video and just across this video, because sometimes Ark can be a pain with that, and it's really not great at all, is it? But, you know, it's Ark. We all still love the game. At least it's not really ASA. There's a little bit of ASA content in this video, actually, because that's just the newest B-roll I've got. But, you know, this game, original Ark, tends to run a lot better than ASA. Actually, just, it always does. And now I'm kind of in the state where I'm like, oh, normal Ark actually runs alright. But I'm in a biased situation, as I do have a 3090, so, you know, I can't really make the biggest judgment on that, because I do have a really powerful GPU. But either way, apart from the Griffin's really great gliding ability, this thing also can deal hefty amounts of damage. And also you can use that gliding ability to dive bomb on creatures as well, dealing even more damage to those creatures, which is a really nice, cool ability to have. And, you know, it can be useful in some PvP scenarios if you want to surprise that player that's trying to raid your base or something like that. Really not too great at making up PvP scenarios, but I'm sure it has definitely come in useful, in handy, not in useful, many a time. And also on top of that, these things are really great for doing wyvern trench runs, because that's probably something which you're going to want to do on Ragnarok. And that also, from that, I just gave you a massive hint to what the creature is in at number 1. and yeah, they're just really easy. You can swoop in there, steal that egg, and then just get out like that, no problems whatsoever. And finally, in at number 1, we've got the wyvern, and more specifically the lightning wyvern, as that is my preferable one for this map. I just think that the fact that it deals torpor along with that lightning ability, it just really makes this creature even better, and its range is really great, and its damage dealing is great from that ability as well. Of course, you can always tame the Ice Wyvern, which was actually first introduced on Ragnarok, as far as I'm concerned. The Poison Wyvern, the Fire Wyvern, and I think that's it on Ragnarok, as far as I'm concerned. Obviously, you've got the Lightning Wyvern as well. You can tame all those other creatures, but I want to focus on the Lightning Wyvern. It's just my preferable creature. Obviously, it is a hefty damage dealer, and actually one of the fastest flyers in the Ark game, and the fastest flyer in Ragnarok, because I'm not counting the Griffin's gliding ability into the fact. If you do use that, then yes, the Griffin will travel faster, but just general normal flying, the wyvern is going to travel faster. The only real downside in the air is this thing's mobility is absolutely awful. And what I didn't talk about the Griffin, you can wield weapons on the back of that thing, which is an absolute game changer. If you were screaming that at the screen, I've finally remembered to say it. The wyvern, if you just saw there, is actually a pretty good gatherer of wood. You can just press C on your keyboard, or whatever the equivalent third attack button is on console, and then boom, like that, you can get some significant wood gains from this creature. You probably wouldn't expect that use out of it, but now you can, because I just told you about it, but you might have already knew about it anyway. And they can also pick up a hefty amount of creatures, which really does aid them in being quite successful flyers, and I think they're the best Ark creatures on Ragnarok. In at number 10, we have got the maewing, and there's kind of one main reason at why I'm putting this creature on this list, and it is that it's such an insanely fast travel mount. It is just inherently very OP in nature. Like, you look at this creature, you think of this creature, you think of really speedy travel mounts, and that is just an OP feature in itself, being able to travel around the map with that speed without having to go into creative mode and all of that stuff. And that's not even an option if you're playing on a server. That's only really an option on just a general single player server, and you probably wouldn't do it anyway because it kind of ruins the fun of the game. But still, just I was needing something to compare it to, and although obviously it's not going to go as fast as someone flying around in creative mode, it is going to fly faster than someone in a tech suit, and it's a lot easier to get than a tech suit, because you only need to be level 19 to get set off with this thing, and then boom, like one of the easiest tames in the game, just trap it before you actually start knocking it out. That kind of goes for most flyers though, or even pretty much every Ark creature that's a knockout tame. It's just so much easier if you do. So yeah, that's the kind of method to the madness. And then you've got yourself a really great, really quick, speedy travel mount that's also a portable feeding trough, and it can gather berries as well. So just a nice little feature for this thing to have. Next up, we got the Thyla, and this thing kind of works for both PvE and PvP players alike out there. This creature really does pack a huge punch in damage department. It also deals the bleed ability, and it can scale any kind of wall or vertical surface, making it a prime creature for raiding people's bases on a PvP server, or just in any given PvP scenario. They're also pretty decent on SOTF as well, due to their high mobility, and they're not too difficult to tame on SOTF either, or really just not too difficult to tame in general. The only real difficulty is the biome they spawn in, as the redwoods can not be the friendliest of biomes pretty much all the time, unless you're extremely lucky. So you always do have to be careful for these things, and like microraptors and all of that. And there are loads of things that want to kill you in the redwoods, but you know, at least Thylas do spawn there, and you can get a lot of great use out of these creatures. So I really do recommend taming one, and I really do think they are extremely OP. The only thing that could make them even more OP is if they were actually allowed into bosses, because when these things came out, they were seen as too overpowered, so then they didn't get the ability to go into bosses. But now with some newer creatures, it's kind of a little bit outdated, in the sense it's actually why the Giga is not on this list. It would have been. This was maybe like 2020, 2019, 2018, but that creature is significantly more outdated nowadays than the Thyla, so, you know, that's why that creature is not on the list, if you were ever wondering at any point. But you can see actually this bleed ability in just a second here. I used to not really know what it did. I just thought it was cool, but it deals damage on a percent base scale instead of just a general damage dealing scale. So no matter the health of the creature, it will always deal the same percent amount of damage, which is why the bleed ability is so OP. And really, if you do have the time, tame yourself a Thyla. You are definitely not going to regret getting one of these things. They are totally worth it, and considering they spawn on the island, they're extremely accessible to like every single Ark player out there without fail whatsoever. Next up, we have got the Theory, and the reason why it's on this list is not just because its saddle was unlocked at level 69.
Nice.
But purely that this creature is an insane gatherer of so many kinds of resources, including fiber, which is actually one which is considerably harder to get than most other resources in bulk with a creature like this, as most herbivores will just gather berries, whereas this thing can gather berries and fiber, and it's also a pretty OP boss creature as well. It really does deal a lot of damage and pack a punch. You could probably tell it would deal a lot of damage in that kind of general area, because look at how large these things' claws are, and when you look at it, it's, I kind of call it the Freddy Krueger of Ark, if you will, or the Tickle Chicken, just depending on what context you really want. Those claws really do, again, pack a huge amount of damage into this creature. Really useful for the dragon boss fight on the island if you've never done that before, and their fiber gathering really does put them up another level for me, as yes, the Moss Chops is another great fiber gatherer. It really doesn't do all too much apart from that. I'm pretty sure it's really great at gathering organic polymer as well, but this is a much more OP creature and significantly more useful just to the general Ark player out there, and especially with that saddle level being so perfect, you really can't miss an opportunity on taming one of these things. They're also really great at gathering thatch and wood too, so there's nothing not to love about this creature, so I really do recommend you taming one of these things as soon as you can, really. Next up, in at number 7, we have got the RG, and doesn't this creature really deserve to be on the spot for being just such a great PvE creature? And also, I'm pretty sure it's a really great PvP creature as well, although I don't really can think of too many uses off the top of my head for this creature in terms of PvP use, but you know, there are definitely still going to pretty much be all the same uses as for PvE players, as this is a really great traveling mount and it has a heck of a lot of weight, so getting metal from point A to point B, or even maybe to point C if you're feeling like it, will be really easy. And you can also pick up a wealth of creatures with this creature, which definitely does aid this thing in being a really great successful creature, because maybe sometimes with a flyer you do want to actually pick up some creatures. Creatures like the Desmodus do not have that ability, although that creature is on the list for several other reasons which I think do put it higher on the list than this creature. It also does have a portable smithy as a saddle, so if you ever break a metal tool if you're out farming, well, the RG can just simply help you with that, as long as you have some metal ingots that have been smelted. Of course, you can't just use the normal raw metal, if you didn't know that already. I'm sure pretty much all of you did. There's not really a point to me saying that, but you know, just might as well, because I'm sure someone's done it before. Then you can easily repair all your metal gear, and they also do regen as well. If you quickly kill something and then eat that dead body, then you get a really nice quick regen buff, which is actually, it's pretty useful, and it's a lot more useful, and you'll use it a lot more than maybe you'd expect. Next up, we got the Carcharodontosaurus, and doesn't this creature just objectively have to be really OP? It's a hugely massive carnivore capable of dealing a lot of damage. And I also was going to consider putting the Titanosaur and things like the mech on the list as well. Actually, I might put the mech kind of here at this spot, because I kind of think it deserves to be here as well. Really huge damage dealing thing, but the Titanosaur is hugely outdated nowadays, and obviously you could kind of just chuck all the Titans here as well, although I really tend to avoid those more, as they're not permanent creatures, although they still definitely do count as creatures. You can make them permanent, of course, with things like mods and all of that for the Titans, but you know, I tend to stray away from those things, and the Carcharodontosaurus is one of those more powerful creatures you can get. That's not the only reason why a creature can be absolutely OP, but if you go by sheer strength, then this probably is the most powerful creature on the list, you could say. Maybe some other creatures could be contested against it and to it, and you know, probably just have to get Cantex to do a video on that, and then there you go, you would get the answers. But I'm probably going to say this is the most powerful one. It's somewhat more difficult to tame than the Giga, because there are a few more steps. I have a guide on my channel, I'll put it up here if I actually remember to do it, otherwise you can just search that. It's not actually too difficult. You just have to be aware for some things, because it can go quite horribly wrong if you don't do it right, and you're just going to be wasting a lot of time, which, you know, you probably don't want to do. But once you do have one of these things, you really are going to enjoy it. In at number 5, we have got the Shadowmane, and this creature is here because it is just so jam-packed full of abilities. You really can't deny this creature's absolutely hugely immense strength when it comes to pretty much anything in the Arc space. It is basically uncontested in size and mobility and all of that. There is kind of one other creature which is in the number 3 spot actually, which personally I think it's really OP, but that's for a slightly different reason. But when it comes to maybe pure mobility, this does have a lot more. Like, just look at how high this thing can jump. It also does have the hydration buff, which does play a huge part in having a really OP creature. If you have buffs, the Megatherium is another great shout as well, although not on this list. It definitely wouldn't be more OP than some of these other creatures. I think that creature is actually, yes, still, while OP, maybe not one of the most OP, although you could easily put it on this list and have people agreeing with you. You actually may want this thing to be on the list, so I guess I give it a quick mention here. The Shadowmane is just so packed full of abilities though. It's got the hydration buff, it's got pack buffs, it's got all of it. It can charge up damage over time, and it even has natural armor. It really is a great OP creature. Next up, we have got the Reaper, and this thing kind of just had to be here, didn't it? When you think of it, it is just such a big, bulky, huge creature, capable of so much damage. Is actually kind of a little bit absurd when you think of it, and it also really does fit into its map very well, but that's not what we're talking about today in this video. We're just talking about a creature that purely deals a lot of damage and also just has great mobility and is generally a really well-rounded creature which is capable of a lot of things. If this was able to go into bosses, then it would be even more OP. It can't though, which is kind of why the creature next up on the list, although maybe not as strong, has a lot of edge over this creature, although you can use it on Extinction for the Titans, although the Giga and the Carcharodonsaurus are the more preferable options. But with loads of new creatures coming out in mods in ASA, I know Extinction is still not here yet, but there may be some other options which people may be kind of becoming more fond to. But either way, just in general terms, the Reaper is a really OP creature. Taming one on Arboration feels like an absolute slog, but a slog that I'm worth going through, and on Gen 2 it's ridiculously easy. So if you don't feel like spending an age going through a huge slog, then tame one on Gen 2 and they're really easy. But once you do have one, you really do feel on top of the world, especially if you do it on Arboration as a process. It's just significantly harder to get it done as on Gen 2. The actual process of taming is obviously the same. And in at number 3, we have got the Rhyniognatha, and this creature literally does bleeder damage to bosses, which is kind of the main reason why it's here, as that is an ability which no other Arc creature has, and it really does make this thing a hugely more OP creature. The fact that it can deal percentage based damage instead of just raw based damage to boss creatures, it's an insane thing to have, and you can grip onto them and all of that, and it's just an insane ability to have. Really, it feels like an absolute cheat if you go into bosses with the Rhyniognatha, because obviously you're also going to go with the pack as well. You're going to have pack buffs on top of it. There's just going to be buffs everywhere, and you're going to melt through those bosses so quickly. Obviously, don't do the Titans on Extinction with the Rhyniognatha, but for everything else, these things work really well, and maybe not the Moda actually, because they're not particularly very good underwater creatures, although they still can do a little bit. Just, you know, maybe that's not particularly what they were designed for, so probably don't bring them to the Moda fight. They'll probably drown anyway, so really, I wouldn't try that whatsoever. I don't really know why I'm trying to like convince you to not use these things for the Moda. I'm pretty sure you weren't going to anyway, but you know, I guess that segment happened. Also, these things take no full damage, which is a nice thing, so you don't have to dismount just before you hit the ground. No matter, like, no, when you fall from a higher place. Sorry, I don't know what sentence was trying to come out there, but that's never going to happen again. Either way, these things, great mobility, and although maybe their parkouring skills isn't quite as elegant as the Thyla solution, I still really like it, and it works, and once you get the hang of it, it really does act quite well. And at number 2, we've got the Desmodus, and this creature just kind of has to be here because it can go, no, we're not going to talk about that. It can go invisible in the night. It's not why it can go OP my brain is in a muddle. The reason why is because Sanguine Elixir exists, it's a blood bag farm, and you can also pick players off riders with this thing, which is absolutely OP for given PvP scenarios. That's why it's not because it doesn't go invisible in the night time. I can't even show you that because I recorded all this B-roll on the Wasteland biome, and then I realised that you can't set it tonight. I probably should have gone to the Snow Dome or the Desert Dome, but I didn't. So, you know, but at least you know it exists. These things can also just grab onto walls, like the Tapijara, which is a nice thing. Just don't press E or the dismount button when you like this. Someone's done it before. Press space or whatever the equivalent button is on console. Not really sure, but, you know, these things, really OP creatures. Sanguine Elixir, absolute cheap for tames, a third of it done like that with a click of a button. And obviously the fact that you can pick people off riders with this thing, insane. Really great for PvP scenarios, and it's also really quick as well. And in at number 1 we have the Rhyniognatha, and the reason why I say this is the most OP art creature is it really does feel out of place for just what it can do. The fact that this thing can pick up Rexes and Paraceratheriums and all of that just kind of seems a bit out of this world to me, and although they're really useful in ASA at the moment because cryopods don't exist, still they feel really out of place in the general art game to me, and kind of maybe too far out of a league that they really shouldn't be going into. And personally, from my opinion, I would like to nerf the Rhyniognatha because I find it way too OP. Personally, also on ASA, I think it should be a little bit rarer. Not quite as rare as it is on just general normal ASE, as you can barely even find those things, but still, on ASA, I feel like there is a little bit of an overspawn there. And you may completely disagree with me on this, and you're happy to, and you can comment down below your thoughts, as I'm always happy to hear your thoughts on creatures like this. But personally, I come from a much earlier stage of Ark playing, from like 2015, 2016, 2017, etc, etc. Going onwards, I did start playing in 2015, so I've been playing Ark for absolutely ages now, and I kind of really like those primitive feelings of the game. Obviously the game has to evolve, and generally it will kind of just get easier, and there'll be some new, cooler, more OP creatures being added as the game progresses, but I feel like this is a huge step too far, and I don't really know what the Fasilasuchus, I think it is, will be like on Scorched. Maybe that will be even more OP than this thing, and I don't really like the way that this is all going, but it does seem to be quite popular with the general Ark player base, so I guess it's a working marketing solution for wildcards and snail games and those kind of people. But also with the like expansion pack, like extra creatures as well, that's like even more OP. I really don't like the route that it's going with these kind of creatures. Again, you're very happy to disagree with me, but personally I think the Rhyniognatha is too OP, and currently I think it's kind of the most OP Arc tame out there, just no questions asked. Personally, really not a favourite of mine, but you know, that's my opinion on it, and I still do think it is a great creature. I'm not dissing it for any of that, just personally like way too OP. But anyway, that is the end of today's video, and I really hope that you enjoyed this one. As always, comment down below what do you think of my Rhyniognatha query. Do you agree with that or not? Comment down below what's the most OP Arc creature to you, and if you didn't agree with this list, your 10 down below, and I'll see you all later.